I have always been enthusiastic about different software tools that we have available. And I'm going to screen share really fast to share one of them. The first one the one I'm going to present to you right now is called Patat. It is a tool for preparing Markdown-based presentations. And the presentation part of this is going to be very short. I'm going to justify why I enjoy Patat and how in particular it changed my life. And then I hope that other people from this quite deep roster that we have will love it, hate it, or have their own things that they would like to discuss. So I think that's all I have for intro. So I'm going to get started. So the motivation for Patat. Great. So the motivation for Patat is you want to give a presentation. And you're thinking, I need to prepare some materials for how I want to give my presentation, and I'm going to choose something. And then the next thing you do is, you Google, how should I do my presentation? Or you fall back to the regular options that you've been using since university. So you start thinking about your choices, and you think, maybe I should do Reveal.js. Maybe I should do a Jupyter Notebook and turn it into slides. Maybe I should use Beamer, or maybe just Google Slides or PowerPoint or whatever. And I propose that you should use none of those. Instead, you should use Patat. So what is Patat? It is a GitHub project maintained by Jasper van der Geut. I never remember what the J stands for. Who's a prolific open source Haskeller. This presentation is written in Patat. Patat stands for presentations atop the ANSI terminal. So what it lets you do is create presentations without ever leaving the terminal window that you probably spend. Sorry, I'm just trying to read chat. Without ever leaving the terminal that you're probably hanging out, spending a lot of time in anyway. Why should you want to use it? So often when you're giving any kind of technical presentation, you're going to want to show code. If you're used to using GitHub, frequently you'll mix your code and markup with Markdown. And if you're trying to translate into Reveal.js or PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever, you end up having to do code formatting somehow. And you go from your normal environment to something where you have to then translate into another strategy for marking things up and show code. In Patat, though, thanks to the magic of another one of my favorite tools, Pandoc, you don't have to do that. You instead get magic markdown syntax in your terminal with language-specific highlighting. So here we have a nice Haskell function called add, and it renders very nicely and actually looks like code. Why else? You don't have to switch windows. So here I'm only sharing my terminal window, and because I have a tiling window manager, I can just bounce back and forth between tabs, and my presentation is just hanging out. This is good in case you don't want to share your full screen for whatever reason. Maybe you have job descriptions up for another company and you're presenting on a work call or whatever other reason, but you just share your terminal. It's where your presentation lives. You also have watch mode. So if we instead want to turn this into JavaScript, and we want this to be function add xy and return x plus, well, ry isn't a thing. We can switch back. And when we go back, we now have different syntax highlighting because Markdown understands a few different languages, and we're good to go. And yeah, being able to keep everything in your terminal and bounce back and forth between things is really convenient. And that's it. That's my pitch for Patat. I have done, I think, 100% of presentations in Patat, at least for quick talks, since learning about it a year and a half ago. Actually, oh wow, 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago now. And I have converted 2 coworkers. It's going really well. It's not a great pace, but we'll get there. So that's my personal favorite tool. I have plenty of other tools that I love as well that I'm happy to talk about. And I think we can open the floor for discussion there. Does that make sense?
So I've got a question actually. Like,
great.
How do you when you say tools that have changed your life, tools you can't live without, how do things make it into that inner circle for you? Because for me, that's quite it's a subtle thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't start in software development. I started. I was going to be an economist. I had very big dreams. I was going to be the computationally literate economist. A little bit of aspiration there with but we were going to see how things went. So I have done like presentations in a lot of different different settings for people with a lot of different backgrounds. For me, that this is just this is text. This takes the whole presentation format and says, "Don't worry about it. It's text." Uh, I've done a lot of text editing for different things, and having like unifying presentation preparation in the same markdown format that basically everything else that I produce is written in at this point uh, took just a lot of like work and manually clicking around menus in Google Slides out of it. Uh, and having the instantaneous feedback somebody of like I switched this function and my presentation is instantly updated with like reasonable syntax highlighting that looks like the syntax highlighting that I'm used to elsewhere.
So it's super interesting here, isn't it? Because you're clearly describing a tool that maps directly to your mental model.
Yes.
Like very, very, very specifically, because it's interesting because I look at this and I see what you get from it, but I could never use this. Like not in like 100 years. Never, because the way I approach presentations is visual.
Okay.
Like the idea of putting text on a wall in presentations to me is anathema, right? And I find that fascinating. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just very, very indicative of two very, very distinctly different approaches. And in a similar way, because the visual kind of approach is something that maps to my mental model rather than like, cool, here's like a procedural bullet point list of things that I'm going to rattle through. Like it's a very, it's subtle because I always think about like that. I have tools that there are tools that have changed my life very, very directly, actually. And the commonality between all of them is they solve an entire category of problem for me, and they're often very expensive, cumbersome, and large. But I don't notice any of it. It's the throw the hardware at it answer to tooling, especially in like software development, right? Where I love the idea of just like I'm sitting and I'm allowed complete focus because all this horrific complex stuff happens outside of my field of view. And actually that gives me the mental fortitude and focus space to just concentrate on the thing I'm doing, which is interesting because I kind of see that same thread in the middle of this, right? You're thinking, oh, my presentation is this, and there's just this, these are the key points, and this is the little bit of code, right? And I respect that. Like I've got a lot of time for it, even if the tool itself makes me go, oh God, like I would go insane if I tried to put a presentation together looking like this. Like I kind of love it.
Yeah. So like this to me like feels like it gets out of my way because so much of what I'm going to do is just going to be like markdown like technical documentation anyway. So being able to go from like markdown technical documentation directly to a presentation is like really valuable for me, at least perhaps more in a work context than it would be in like a general like outside of work presentation context. But yeah, that mapping and that like getting out of the way is I think probably critical, a hurdle that has to be cleared to get into this category at least.
So I think for me in a similar way, like I think actually the thing I would use as an example is a category of tools. So a continuous test runners. Continuous test runners changed my entire life. Well, certainly my entire career as a hands-on programmer. And it's all about feedback cycle, right? Anything that removes all the noise from any feedback cycle is the thing that I cling to for dear fucking life. Like it's the thing that makes me feel good. And I don't know, like I don't know what I would do without them. I legitimately don't know how I would do my job. He says, not having worked since February, but like I don't know how I would do my job without them. Like I kind of feel like certainly in hands-on development, continuous test runners, for anyone that doesn't understand what they are, because I can see 13 eyeballs who are invisibly in the chat. A continuous test runner comes from broadly from the school of kind of test-driven development, where you press a single key on your keyboard, and any code that is affected by the line of code you just edited gets recompiled or reinterpreted and run in parallel, giving you feedback inside of your tool. And the amazing thing about it is you know that your code is working or not per key press, right? Like if you've ever worked in a programming environment that has a REPL, and I can never remember what REPL actually stands for, like read, edit, something, repeat, who cares? The idea is immediate feedback, right? Like absolutely immediacy. And so a continuous test runner gives you that per key press, per change. And it's kind of the same thing you see in front-end development when people use kind of hot module reloading in a web browser, right? The feedback cycle you're getting is identical. as to when you're using a continuous test runner. I press key, I see effect. I press key, I see effect. And I think tools of that caliber sit alone and above literally everything else in all of software other than a good debugger. There's two things between them. I feel like I've taught people who have been programming for 20 years how to use those tools, and at first they never, like debuggers are contentious certainly in kind of modern JavaScripty language because they were what people first learnt, even though they pre-existed that as a development stack. Continuous test runners, when you show them to people for the first time, a lot of people go, that's really cool, but I can't see myself ever using it. And then you sit with them for a week and work with them in a continuous test runner, and they can never look back. And I was exactly the same. Like I remember sitting there with someone who was like, yeah, you'll love this. This is totally up your street. I'm just like, I don't really get it. This is like a thing you want me to buy for a couple of £100. But I have literally never looked back. It changed my entire career, I think, which is fascinating. So, like, is there anyone else that has like a favorite tool, like an absolute favorite tool?
Yes.
Come on, give it us.
So I was, doing JavaScript and front end stuff for ages, and then this really cool thing called Prettier came out, and I don't think I could ever go back to writing any form of code without something that auto formats it for me when I press save.
So interestingly, what's the thing you get from Prettier? Is it aesthetic or is it function?
So aesthetically good, but the main thing is, so for the last 4 years I've worked in remote teams, and when you pair it with ESLint, you can say, okay, we want single quotes, double quotes, we want space tabs, we want this. And actually as a remote team to define a lot of that stuff, I've found makes remote working really, really well. And it just means that, like, particularly when you've got someone new on the team, you don't need to say, oh, by the way, like, we always start, this thing with a capital letter, or, oh, it's a single quote rather than a double quote. Like, actually, if you have, Prettier working really well with ESLint, it makes collaborating remotely really, really well. So yeah, that's mine, Prettier.
Yeah, I kind of totally agree. I kind of despise ESLint to my very core because what I think it does is it drives people to myopic discussions.
Yeah.
But I'm always walked back from that cliff because it gives the kind of coherence. Like I always think there's the one greatest challenge ever in working in software teams is replacing your own internal mental model with that of a team. Like it's a really, really difficult thing to do because it's not about right. It's not, and a lot of it's about taste actually, and taste is really subjective, right? Like
Yeah, and I'm a freelancer as well. So actually, like, if I know that's all set up when I join a team, it's one less thing that I have to worry about. And it's one less thing that, like, someone may comment on my PR being like, oh, by the way, like, this is how we do things. Like, and it's a really small thing. And I've worked in so many teams where, like, I really don't care whether it's single or double quotes. Like, I really I really don't care. But, like, I'll follow whatever your team is doing. So for me, it's just made, like, joining teams that little bit easier, and just takes away that, like, cognitive energy of, like, because there's already loads to know when you're, like, joining a big code base and, like, a new team. Like, there's already so much to think about that if there's that one little thing that I don't have to think about, it just makes it, like, that little bit easier for me.
You've just reminded me of something I saw on Twitter last week, which was someone mentioning something they said something was a cognitive load generator. And I thought that would be the best name for a sludge metal band in the entire world. Cognitive load generator, playing at Glastonbury, like I'm in for it. No, but like, totally there with you, like that sense of friction. I don't know, like one of the most, there's a thing here between both of these two tools that I can see, like the best tools seem to be things that get out of the way, right? That's the point. Or they remove a whole category of toil in some shape or another, some kind of toil from a situation. That there is nothing I think I despise more that's a lie. I'm going to say there's nothing I despise more in the world than bike shedding in pull requests, but things like Prettier and ESLint, like, absolutely are the sucker punch away from all that stuff. I don't know if anyone in the chat is aware of the term bike shedding. or like, have you come across this before? I love it. And people use it without explaining it, so I'm going to explain it just in case. So the idea is like we're going to make we're going to build a bike shed, and we have all these long discussions about like, oh, how many bikes is it going to be able to store, and what kind of equipment do we have inside? And some absolute asshole is just like, oh, but what color is the bike shed going to be? And you're like, I don't care. Please, I don't care. Please leave it be. No, but what color is the bike shed going to be, right? And they completely derail all the useful discussion about a tool or a process or a change by obsessing over some minute detail in it. And it occurs all the time because the things that get bike shedded normally are the topic that people with no knowledge, experience, or understanding of the problem domain can weigh in on. Everybody can have an opinion on the color of a bike shed. I don't know how to store bikes in a bike shed. I don't have an opinion, but people will insist. And you know, the best tools solve those problems, right? Yeah, and opinions, something. Everybody knows how bad opinions all are. How about anyone else in the chat? Like, does anyone else? What are your favorite tools? We got this.
Well, I can share one. Sorry, my mic was.
No, you sound great.
My mic was being charged. Okay, so I think recently Docker has changed my life. I get rid of the, for example, in developing a new project with a single command, I can just say that, okay, please start the database. And then I haven't had to install any databases directly on my computer for a long time. I
mean, installing databases is hateful.
Yes, so that definitely has removed some pain.
So this is really interesting, isn't it? Like Docker, glorified zip files, where we all decided that we couldn't deal with Unix installation for long enough, that we were just going to zip up the entire goddamn system and ship that anyway. Have you seen the speaking of awesome new tools, like the GitHub code spaces stuff that's just come out with dev containers? Because
no.
If you like Docker, oh my sweet lord. Oh my sweet lord. So you basically stick a Docker file in your GitHub repository, and you can go to any GitHub repository that has one of these Docker files, and you can click edit, and it spins up a full IDE in your browser, a full instance of Visual Studio Code, tears up the whole environment from your Docker file, and you can just edit your stuff in the browser. It's like it's fully, I can work on a phone in a cocktail bar kind of awesome. Docker is, it's interesting. It's like a proper sea change, isn't it? Like in the way that people approach building things. And also the number one thing that makes deploying software more complex than it was before.
Well, depends on what you compare to.
I think that here my controversial opinion on Docker is, by effectively giving up and controlling the dependencies of downstream systems, what we've done is exposed ourselves to security risk by letting dependencies atrophy in a whole series of unmaintained containers. When actually what we should have really done is taken that complexity out of our software and built our software in a cleverer way to adapt to the various runtimes that it was executing inside of. But I don't want to be a contrary so-and-so. So.
And also, if you depends on how you run your containers, you can make it very complex. Kubernetes and other things.
Yeah, nobody needs Kubernetes. Yeah. That's like my least favorite tool in the entire world. Rather than tools that change my life for the better, definitely the stuff that like make me want to hurl entire data centers out of Windows. I know. Like the salaries are so good, but like just use managed services. Just use managed services. I'm going to stop talking and give the floor to somebody else because I feel like I'm running my mouth.
And if you stop screen sharing, then that will also give one space. Yeah, thanks. So, who wants to go next? Favorite tools.
I've got another one. It's a very new one, and I don't know it that much, but GitHub Actions. Yeah, I've been building a thing for codebar where I pull in like live stats. So we're going to have this like new stats fancy website soon. And I can I've got like a script in the background that's like pulling in the data, and like locally I do yarn data, and then that updates my like JSON files. But actually with GitHub Actions, I can just say, oh, every day run yarn data for me to update this website. And it's really cool. I don't know that much more about it because it's still very new to me. So don't like go ask me complex questions about it. But I think it's really cool. GitHub Actions.
Did you schedule the script on your home computer before, or did you just run it manually intermittently?
Before I was just running it manually. Whenever I would like go back to working on it, I'd be like, oh, what's updated? Yarn data. And then I'd see like the student numbers had been like increased by 10 or like something like that. And then I was like, oh, I can actually just get, you know, GitHub Action to just run this every day for me, to be like, oh, just run this yarn data script every day and then push to master. And so it's really cool.
So interestingly built. Sorry, please.
A thing that I really enjoy about them is that they've taken the infrastructure out of like scheduled cloud functions.
Yeah.
Like previously, you would like write a Lambda, I guess, and schedule it in CloudWatch, and then you'd have to open the CloudWatch dashboard, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
And they're quite an achievement, I think.
Yeah, and again with like rather than like at the moment, I don't need to add like Travis or like any of these other like Circle CI or any of these other continuous integrations. Like actually, I've got my linter script that goes like, you know, yarn lint or npm run lint. And again, I've just set another script up on another project that just goes, if I forget to do it, which I often do before I do my pull request, I just say, you know, whenever there's a pull request, run this script, and then, you know, the PR will say, oh, you know, you can't push to master yet because there's an error, and it would be like, oh, it's because I didn't check lint. And so, and again, so that's another place where I've used it that's really cool.
Friends don't let friends install Jenkins. like a truism. Really interestingly, on top of GitHub Actions, so I've got this like I'm in the middle of a 2-month-long love affair with Azure Static Web Apps. They're like in beta at the moment. So if you use Zeek now or Vercel or whatever it's called these days.
Vercel, yeah, I use Vercel quite a lot.
So it's the Azure version of that.
Okay.
And it's absolutely incredible, and it's built on top of GitHub Actions because obviously Microsoft own every single good development tool in 2020. So you can, they're currently free. I've got like a whole talk on it that I'm definitely not going to do. But yeah, you just put code in a repository and it generates GitHub Actions, shared secrets, and deploys static web apps in like 3 clicks. It's free until I think about March next year because they're currently trialing it. But the really, really cool thing they've done on top of it, which is like super, super awesome, is you can just drop a folder in called API, stick a load of JavaScript functions in there, and they will spin up serverless Azure functions that you can call as if you had a server-side web app. And it just kind of works totally transparently, and it's freaking amazing. Like, honestly, super, super fast, like best in class at the moment. But it's still very paint-dripping wet beta, and there's like 3 pages of documentation. But you can do all sorts of complete madness in it because they've got this like model called language provider, so you can write your own custom language provider. So if you ever wanted to write a web app in like any, you know, cool, you really like Elixir, you and the 3 other people, fine, write your own language provider, and you can write an Elixir like static web app with server-side functions. Like, it's super, super awesome. And it's all baked on top of exactly that same GitHub Actions kind of UX. Really, really cool. Love it. Love all the work.
Someone has asked, can we get a roundup of the approved tools at the end? So let's do a roundup quickly. So what have we said, James? What was your first one?
What I have on my list so far is Patat for terminal-based presentations, Prettier for ending arguments about formatting and just having everyone agree because the tool says so.
I was hoping that would Sorry, I was hoping that would actually create a list and not
just deleting the comments.
Sorry, I'm just deleting them now because I actually wanted to create like a list.
Oh yeah, no, I have one going in a file right now.
Okay, I'll let you share them at the end.
So there's the continuous test runner tool. There's two of them that I've used like super extensively and literally believed are the best thing in all of programming. Wallaby.js, if you're in JavaScript land, is like mind-blowingly excellent, better than anything else you will ever see. And if you, I mean, you're probably not in .NET land, but if you are, Ncrunch does the same thing. If you're on the JVM, so Kotlin or Java, Infinitest does the same thing. Just a whole category of tools together. I can see you typing as fast as you humanly can.
Yep. Does Infinitest also handle Clojure and Scala, or is it only Kotlin and Java?
Well, if it runs Kotlin and Java, I presume it's running on middleware. So I've never tested it, I've never tried, but I presume it does.
I think for Clojure there are different tools because it's language has a bit different style. The style with the language is okay. You keep the same JVM up, whereas with Java and Kotlin, usually you start a new JVM for each test run. So for Clojure, there's one called Culture. So that's the one I use.
Oh, really? Awesome. I've never heard of that. Today I learned. What time are we on for a slot? I'm very conscious that we're rambling. Oh, we got
15 minutes.
15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any cool tools they want to demo? That would be exciting. Actually, I've got a relevant tool. God, have you used any of you folks? I get the feeling there's a very JavaScripty audience here, or at least JavaScript. I say talking to someone that showed a Haskell sample and a guy that's talking about Clojure. So maybe not. Maybe I'm misreading the entire audience. But I've been using a tool called Snowpack recently, which is like the first. So it's a replacement for the fresh hell that is Webpack and Rollup and all that other incredibly flaky Lego brick horribleness that lives at the bottom of many JavaScript apps. It basically internalizes all those dependencies and just works without any configuration out the box. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. So you can like do really, really rich client-side apps, and you can drop TypeScript files in, and it will transparently compile them in memory at runtime. You can reference your TypeScript as if it was JavaScript, and it does ES6 module generation and all this kind of stuff. You can reference NPM packages in your front end, and it will bundle and convert them correctly. It's just like actually super productive. It's the first time, I think, in about half a decade I felt like there's a best-in-class JavaScript tool that is just a productive programming environment, like super, super slick. TypeScript is really, really, really good these days, and it makes it feel beautiful and really, really easy to work in. That's snowpack.dev, and I built a whole bunch of stuff on it in like the last 3 months, and I'm totally like a total convert. I think it's amazing.
Nice.
Have you also used? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with David.
Have you also used Parcel or other advertised zero config bundlers?
It's in that same ballpark, but ironically, I've always found that they require more configuration. Yeah, and I don't know. Like I'm very, very simple. I like my software to be as simple as possible. I like there to be no ceremony, no setup, and like a 2-liner gets me running the Snowpack, and it's got like a plugin infrastructure that's so it will support Webpack. Apparently, it runs your Create React apps if you're a React dev. Just kind of out of the box, it kind of works it out and does whatever voodoo is required. And I just think that's a killer feature, because honestly, like the vast majority of people doing front end work are basically doing some form of React, Angular, or vanilla JavaScript, right? And if it satisfies all three of those pillars, and I think it also supports that cool one. What's that new JavaScript compiler thing that's actually pretty cool?
Reason or Elm, or something else?
No.
All right, I'll try.
Yeah, gone blank. I'm sure someone who's more JavaScripty than I am will probably know the answer to that. Profiling tools. I see the question about profiling tools. What languages, systems, or runtimes? Because that's an incredibly deep and subjective question. Do you mean like profiling the performance of web applications in JavaScript? Okay, cool. That's a really good question, isn't it? Because everyone, I don't know, what do you folks think? Like, people tend to build performance tests in a mixture of like old school JMeter, Gatling, and other fairly outside in perf testing stuff. But like, JavaScript runtime instrumentation is generally very poor. Like, V8 don't give you a lot really outside of the browser. I don't know anything amazing in that space, truly.
So one tool that I think is really interesting is so a lot of the open tracing backends also have. Are people familiar with tracing?
Do you want to explain what you mean when you say it?
Sure. Yeah. So tracing is a practice for distributed systems where for every function call you attach some kind of ID, and you have like a span, which is the beginning of the beginning of the thing that you're tracking to the end, and within that span you can have subspans, and those subspans can be tagged with specific information, like, well, we entered this function and then this function executed, and that subspan can have more subspans, and you can track at a very granular level what's going on to get from point A to point B in your application. So it's really common in backend services, but like Honeycomb and I think Lightstep as well also both have JavaScript clients and a permissions model that allows you to attach those tracing IDs in your front end, so that you can. So let's say you're doing like a page transition, and you want to know, like, okay, the button was clicked. We have to make the API request. Then there's a render. That render also involves some other API requests. How much time are we spending in these different sections of getting the user to their next, the next place that they want to be? And like, how much time are we spending in both the front end and back end functions? And then wherever those traces are going, that might be a managed service. It might be like a free open source service like Jaeger, will show you the spans that are tagged from everywhere that process has gone, both the front end and the back end.
Yeah, so yeah. Maybe I can say something about it in the Java world. I mostly have used the Visual VM for running some profiling, and then also to my mind came the Java microbenchmark tool, JMH, Java microbenchmark harness. Which takes care of because normally when you have a small piece of code and that you want to benchmark how it works, then if you are not careful, then the environment will optimize away your code and it doesn't anymore do what you actually mean. So that's one tool that takes care of like 60% of the things you need to take into consideration.
I suppose I have a fairly strong opinion that well-formed platforms should take care of a lot of this kind of instrumentation. And if your platform doesn't, maybe pick a better platform to host your code. I know that sounds very much like just a be better concept, which is really great. I do a lot of like Azure stuff, and Azure's analytics is truly like it's the same stuff. You get brilliant stats over nodes and stuff like that without really having to configure too much. Outside of that, like, I think it's important to understand the difference between like performance profiling as a cohesive system and like application error handling. Actually, I feel like a lot of the time when people think they're looking for profiling tools, they're actually looking for application error handling. And like crash analytics and stuff like that is generally really, really like cheap to buy these days, and actually the signal that has the most value to programs. Like I've used, I don't know if any of these conversion to Radar. It's like a source platform. it's similar to like
Can you check that which microphone you are using in this?
Oh, am I breaking up?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, now it sounds better. Yeah.
Sorry. Who knows? But yeah, Raygun is really, really great because it gives you like foldable stack traces of errors when they happen. And for years, it was always like the tool that I loved the most. I would always use something like papertrail.io for like a big log fire hose, and Raygun for really, really precise application analytics. And I shipped huge distributed systems with just those two tools. I love what I'm seeing. I've never used Honeycomb, but I've heard like phenomenal things about the kind of stuff that's coming out of Honeycomb these days. Can I repeat that on errors versus profiling tools? Of course, yes. Okay, so when you're an application developer, what you really want to know is what errors are your users seeing, how many users are affected, and where exactly in your code is the error happening. Right? Those are three very, very targeted and specific questions. If you find yourself reaching for log files to try and divine that information when something is on fire, you've kind of already lost the fight. Right, like you're drowning and someone is throwing more and more log lines at you. Whereas a really great APM tool, which is what application performance monitoring or whatever the acronym stands for, like Raygun, will just tell you. It'll just be like, cool, well, in your application, these three exceptions happened. Here were the user IDs or the unique IDs we've assigned them. Here's the full stack trace. Here's the user's browser. Here's the server that was running on, right? You take all that diagnosis out, like when everything is on fire, you don't want to be diagnosing problems. You want to be observing errors in code that you can address. Whereas performance is more it's more speculative, really. Like there's a truism, like no performance test you ever write will ever be accurate, because you're all testing in production, and it's the only place performance ever really matters. So actually, instrumentation and monitoring is more powerful for performance, along with like canary builds and like clever continuous delivery techniques to basically slowly test new code, because ultimately anything you do to try and simulate the kind of production load that might cause performance errors is probably not going to be right. Like you'll probably screw it up, or you'll miss something, or you won't quite get the complexity of, oh, well, we got like 300 users in the checkout, but also it's like 1,000 users looking at like this other bit of the site, and actually the combination of those two things is the real problem. So actually being able to observe your software as it really runs is always more valuable than the time you spend trying to simulate failure. I think that is what I was trying to say in a roundabout way. Does that answer the question? I'm going to presume the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, just for a little bit more on that, like we spent 1.5 years trying to debug a problem in an application before adding tracing to the application, and the true problem turned out to be somewhere that we hadn't even considered looking at. But it just became very clear when there's this huge span for something that was like deserialize JSON from memcache. It's like, why is deserializing JSON from memcache taking 70% of the request time? No one's ever going to know the answer. But yeah, that was a fun 18 months.
That reminds me of having to remove a bunch of performance optimizations from a company I bought for another company, which exactly that kind of thing. They basically enabled compression and caching, but basically every time they put some data into the cache, they would zip it in memory and put it in the cache. And I just ran a performance profiling tool. Like, why are you compressing 5 meg of data on every request? Oh, it's for performance. Well, like every time there's a cache miss. And they were like, oh, yeah. Took it out and the whole thing ran on like half a server rather than the 20 they had set up, because we always think we're smart. And actually, there's something else here about tools, right? The beautiful thing about tools is they take away that thing where you have to wonder whether you are actually smart or whether you do know something, because actually it doesn't really matter what you think. It's only about what you can observe. Like, what can you show me to be really true, not my wild speculation. So I feel like there's kind of 3 or 4 of us that have spoken loads and loads and loads, mostly me and my big gob in the afternoon. I'm very, very sorry. It's Saturday. I'm having a wonderful time. Anyone else in the chat? Like, what's the smallest tool? In fact, even to the people on the call right now, what is the smallest tool that you think has had the most like useful, like just the tiny thing you would never think of, that's been like vitally important? It's actually a hard question. That was really cruel of me.
For myself, I would say maybe Bash.
Bash.
Yeah,
Masochist.
right.
I'm joking.
It's everywhere, so you can mostly rely on it.
Yeah, like you're basically forced to suffer it whether you like it or not.
Yeah. So
True.
Better learn it a little bit. So
I think I think in my entire programming career, this sounds like a really weird and trite point. The thing that has served me the best is learning how to use conditional breakpoints in software. So that's when you put a breakpoint on a line of code that you can run in a debugger with some condition. So instead of stepping through your code or console logging or whatever your chosen debugging technique is, you can just put a breakpoint on a line of code and say, only break on this line of code when this condition is met. And conditional breakpoints are in like most programming environments, but people stop reading at like page 2 of the manual. And it just means that like I can always find the problem. Always. Like it sounds so really, really trite. I just don't waste hours and minutes stepping through code that's completely of no interest to me. And I saw this down here. I work on TV, so user agent extensions on Chrome, I would not be able to live without it yet, right? Like the little things that make people's lives that much better.
also about conditional breakpoints, they are useful for hacking websites. Like there was this one website which prevents you from printing some stuff. It has some with JavaScript. It generates some stuff that you can preview it but not print it. But you can set in the right line of JavaScript, you can set a conditional breakpoint which does an assignment operation to one of the local variables, and then that way change the state of the running application. So that was a handy trick.
100%, man. But I think even more broadly, XUnit compatible test frameworks are probably the best thing in all the software.
Yeah.
Like take everything else out, you leave me a unit test framework that works, and I can build anything. Like I'm 100% convinced by that. It's all the fun of a REPL with source control.
Yeah.
I can see. No, it's just James in the chat. I thought there was more feedback.
And if there is no XUnit, then it doesn't take too long to build one yourself.
Exactly right. Like you can build an XUnit compatible test framework in like an
Day or
hour,
2.
2 hours at a push in a mature language. Like it's not hard, and it's so simple. It's there's some trivia here. So I don't know if anyone's read the original like Kent Beck unit testing book, like the XP book originally. It's actually brilliant. Like Kent Beck is the hero we all need. Like he's the one great old guy who was just right about everything from the very, very start. And there's this, I forget the quote by heart, but he has this whole thing about how he didn't invent unit testing, and everyone always credits him with inventing unit testing. He didn't do that. He just rediscovered it, and he always talks about it as a rediscovery because he went and he went to some to meet a bunch of people that used to program mainframes and described, well, so first I write some code that says what I'm going to do and then checks what I was going to get at the end of it. And they all looked at him like he was mad. And he said, well, how else would you write software? There we go. Like literally the original Bibles, right? They are still the best.
Yeah.
I have not tried GitHub's new CLI, though I've heard really good things about it. I like clicking. I'm a big fan of clicking stuff. I don't know. Has anyone tried GitHub's new CLI? Anyone in the chat?
What does it do?
I think it does everything you can do by clicking in GitHub just on the command line. So instead of like having a really meaningful web interface with labels on the stuff you can do, you just have to remember all the stuff. And being slightly facetious.
I mean, I think what it's to like replace the mapping that people have to do between Git and GitHub with a mapping between GitHub and GitHub.
Yeah, I see that.
I mean, okay. Yeah, that's a tool for checking PRs and.
I suppose if Git's history is one of being the least usable version of source control in the entire world that everyone learnt to use by force of will, and GitHub's history is taking Git and making it completely palatable and understandable by everyone in general, I can kind of see how a GitHub command line tool totally fills that exact same void. It's like, oh, it's like Git on the command line, but without all the garbage. Because like the love of Git on the command line is very, very Stockholm syndrome-y because it is like awful mystery meat command line garbage for the most part. We just all know it now. So I can kind of see how making that more approachable is just like an awesome thing. I am totally here for that. I can see everyone looking uncomfortable with me saying Git on the command line is utter garbage, but it really is. And it was always garbage.
I just want to... When do we end? Do we end at 11:30?
Yeah, I think.
I think we ended 3 minutes ago, but we're still here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next talk starts in 2 minutes, I believe.
Yep.
All right. Well, I want to make sure to formally release people if they're hanging out because we haven't stopped talking. But I will certainly hang out and keep talking.